Vi is a well-known and violent Warden of Piltover, appearing alongside the Sheriff in lore, cinematics and most recently Arcane. Arcane really showed her ability to fight in the streets, but how does she fare when the gloves are on? Today, we shine a competitive spotlight on Vi, the Piltover Enforcer.
Vi stands for violence.
Vi absolutely busted onto the scene, getting a really early nerf after release to keep her in line, but it didn't stop a dominant showing in her first professional season. Leading up to Worlds, a bug fix buffed her cooldowns, leading her to taking the spot of 4th most common jungler in the entirety of the competition, and the only common jungler who did not see play in a different role. However, of all of the junglers who saw more than 20% of the tournament, Vi boasted the second highest win rate at 53.8%. Only the king of the jungle, Lee Sin, beat her on this. Back in Season 3, Vi took the role of a CC tank engage, alongside other top junglers like Elise and Lee Sin. She was feared for her early game burst when in the right hands, or gloves, but Vi could do more than just tank. With denting blows dealing damage based off maximum health and an excessive force resetting auto attacks, Vi could deal with other tanks quite effectively. A key skill required when considering the amount of tanks in top and jungle. Vi saw nearly half of the tournament being picked or banned in 48% of all games, almost always starting with Spirit of the Ancient Golem and then Locket of the Iron Solari. Vi could soak up damage and provide shields for her team, peel for her carries and engage with her strong Q. Vault Breaker and Cease and Desist closed gaps whilst locking down their targets, whilst her blast shield kept her healthy during the engage. On top of that, back then, Locket was built from Emblem of Valor, which gave Vi early access to HP regen, keeping her healthy while she cleared the jungle and meant that she could regularly bring aggressive ganking to her team. Early on in the tournament, Vi got consistently banned away from TSM's The Odd One, a wise choice given that every time the Canadian jungler got his hands on the Piltover's fists, TSM won their games. In fact, the only 2 games they won for the whole tournament. Vi was also consistently banned away from the terrifying SKT jungler Bengi, who after getting his hands on the Enforcer, had her banned away from him during every game in the latter half of the tournament. Vi saw bans in all 3 of the finals games. It's undeniable that Vi left a huge dent in her first season at Worlds, being the target of aggressive banning through all stages of the tournament. But when she was picked up, the impact she made on teamfights, jungle ganks, and general game pace was just monumental, often sporting a KDA above 10. A very strong opening season. In the lead up to Worlds 2014, patch 4.4 really punished Vi's damage for building tanky. They moved some of the base damage into bonus AD alongside increasing the cooldown on assault and battery. Vi had to move to an AD bruiser build to stay relevant at all. This meant that Vi's build tended towards Spirit of the Elder Lizard instead of Golem, bringing early damage before going into the tanky items like Locket, Randuins and more. However, the meta had shifted, putting more emphasis on damage building junglers. Lee Sin managed to make that change while still building his bulky items like the Locket and Randuins, and as such remained king of the jungle, present in a huge 92.3% of games. On top of that, Vi had no hope in matching the newly reworked Rengar's damage output. Kha'Zix also had a huge presence after a number of net gain buffs during the season. Competition with tank junglers was tight too, with Elise receiving buffs to her range stun, and she had the ability to spec into the Spirit of the Wraith, also recently buffed. Therefore, Elise just saw more play than Vi as well. Another blow to Vi's viability was a slight buff to Jarvan 4, which just meant there was another AD bruiser that could outshine Vi as well. Because of all of this, Vi had almost no impacts in Worlds 2014, only appearing in 1 of all of the 78 games, which she lost. Hard. She went 0-7-1, and the worst thing about that, it was 50% of the kill participation. Definitely not a good year for Vi. Season 5 saw huge changes to the jungle and the jungle items and how Smite worked, and it meant that Vi was further able to spec into her bruiser build. She was able to bring more lockdown with Chilling Smite or more sustain and healthier ganks with Ranger's Trailblazer. On top of that, she could use the Warrior's enchantment to bring even more AD to her kit. The issue with these jungle changes though, they continue to benefit the other junglers too. And as such, Vi was only picked for 1 game again in Worlds 2015. The players in the Chinese and American leagues did not give up on Vi though. During the regular season she saw a huge 72% win rate from 32 games in North America, proving she truly had impact. However, a nerf to the damage on her role ensured that she wasn't bringing the damage that Lee Sin and other junglers could. And so, Vi went back to her tank builds of the jungle, including Warmogs, the old Locket and Randuins, and then occasionally picking up the Maw. Unfortunately for Vi, the jungle was not very receptive to this, Runic Echo's junglers were dominating the season, and again, Elise brought that long-range hard CC, great tanking ability, and magic damage that completely nullified the need for Vi's early game. And as if Vi didn't already have a tough enough matchup against the Lady of Legs, Elise also scaled better into the late game. She was everywhere in Worlds, picked and banned in 71 of 73 games. The final blow in the comparison between the two is that Elise got her CC buffed and her Spiderlings buffed, whilst Vi took that nerf to her ult. Season 5 also saw Gragas dominate in the jungle with his access to Runic Echoes. Gragas bought similar engage to Vi, although with his belly, not fist. The Drunkard bought an ult that could engage and disengage from range. Moreover, Gragas brought role flexibility because he could play top, mid and support. Despite Vi's original design being aimed for top lane, there was no doubt where she was playing when she was picked in Champion Select. Another pint in the Drunkard's hands is that his engage had no wind up, there was no visibility to it, and with the flash could almost instantly cover the same distance as Vi and guarantee the knockup. He also had a bigger model and a bigger collision. Another stinging jab for Vi was the release of Rek'Sai. The Void Burrow came onto the Rift strong and even with a few nerfs completely outshined every other jungler of the season. Her global map pressure, increased vision, hard CC engage, long range slow, execute and build flexibility just meant that Rek'Sai brought such pressure even Lee Sin dropped to 38% presence. So Vi never stood a chance against the Mother of the Void. And so, another season passed without Vi making any real dent. Season 6 did not bring the redemption Vi needed. With yet another change to jungle items, Trailblazer was removed and Cinderhulk was the only jungle item to not be buffed in the rework, and then later got a further nerf as well. Also, AD items saw buffs in the pre-season that put more power in junglers who like to bring the damage. The Mastery rework didn't help Vi either, and so the Fists of Piltover were forced to look at other options. The players did too, and so Vi saw no competitive play for the whole of Season 6 Worlds. Another Vi-free season in 2017, even after a reduction to Assault and Battery's cooldown. It's odd to see that she got no play at all. The newly improved rune, Courage of the Colossus and strong tank items led to a tank meta for junglers. A meta that was in full swing with Tracker's Knife given vision to add to the supportive role tanks brought with Lockets and Randuins. Another factor leading to the absence of Vi being strange is that Vi showed huge dominance in the games that she was selected during the NA and Chinese leagues. With Vi's ability to enjoy the tank buffs and denting blows dealing damage based on max health, Vi was well placed to deal with the tank meta. Zentinnial proved her viability as the only NA jungler to pick her up, boasting an 100% win ratio and a KDA average of 2.5 by 1 by 5.5. Also, alongside the buff to her ult cooldown, they also put in a bug fix which stopped her following to Fountain, which was hilarious at the time, but still wasn't enough to combat the tanks that dominated in Season 7. Just after Worlds 2017, Vi got a buff to her minimum damage on Vault Breaker, and so quick CC was far more viable. Vi also got a buff to her base AD and armor, making her clear stronger. And then, during Season 8, Vi got even more buffs. More health regen, lower cooldowns on her passive Q, E and ult, and all of these buffs that she had, Vi still made no appearance in Season 8 Worlds. Vi didn't benefit too much from runes reforged, she was unable to find one that truly fit her playstyle. Vi did get some good buffs during the season, but so did old rivals Lee Sin, Elise and Gragas. On top of all of this, a new meta had formed. The tanks had suffered more Cinderhulk nerfs and AD junglers with on-hit sustain such as Nocturne and Xin Zhao were on the rise. This meant that any tank stats that Vi did pick up from Cinderhulk when she did were reduced, but also it reduced the value of the max health damage on denting blows. The general playstyle was just far more focused on running down opponents in Worlds 2018. Even tanky junglers that survived in this meta like Olaf and Skarner only managed to do so because they could run headfirst into the enemy and make a pick. As such, Worlds Season 8 was another disappointing one for Vi. Season 9 brought more jungle changes such as reduced experience, which meant that ganking junglers were favourable once again. Plus the change of rune traits meant that there was more flexibility to which secondary tree you looked into, and that opened up the mastery system. On top of all that, Vi received a headlining buff, lower cooldowns, more base damage, more shielding from her passive, and Vi lost the damage reduction on her Q for non-champions. So with faster clears, better stats, and better ratios more suited to her old tanky builds, and a meta that rewards gank heavy playstyle, Vi finally made a reappearance on the professional scene. Granted, it was only one whole game that featured Vi in Worlds 2019, and she did go 0-7-4, and she did lose, but it was great to see her back on the world stage. All jokes aside, the Russian-founded LCL did make great use of Vi during the season, with a nearly 60% win ratio from the games she played. The rest of Worlds 2019 was dominated by old rivals Lee Sin and Elise. Lee Sin brought such huge damage and great pick potential, whereas Elise brought her ranged hard CC, and the two of them continued to be king and queen of the jungle for another season. With the gank heavy meta, old rival Gragas stayed relevant too, and Vi just sat on the bench. Not enough damage to be a true bruiser, and engage that was tracked and easy to dodge, stopping her having a significant impact. During the season, Vi's burst bruiser build was explored with Trinity Force and Electrocute replacing normal Cleaver and Aftershock, but there was no avail, and as such she fell to her previous bruiser build with early damage from Warrior's Enchantment and a Black Cleaver before exploring into tankier options. This predictability, alongside the normal problems that Vi faced, just meant that she wasn't really effective enough to be on the world stage for Season 9. By the time Worlds 2020 came round, there was even more meta changes and even more focus on damaged junglers. Rift Herald spawned earlier, which meant that early fights and early control were essential to start the snowball in games. Vi did have a strong early game, and she was a good dueler, but it was nothing compared to the new king of the jungle, Graves, who alongside Lilia, Gragas, Kindred and of course Lee Sin, ensured that every niche that Vi filled was filled better by another champion. It was just another season where Vi was not able to make a presence on the world stage. Most recently, Worlds 2021 saw a huge change. Season 11 brought in the mythic items. Some of these were perfect for a number of Vi builds, but sadly it wasn't enough to get Vi back on the world stage. Although she did see some success in the season with a tanky build focused around Divine Sunderer, it wasn't enough to match Lee Sin's access to Eclipse, which gave his initial burst more survivability and helped him overcome the lifesteal nerf that had affected the entirety of the game. On top of that, old rival Lee Sin did see some buffs during the pre-season, with a little bit of toning down during the year, which is far more attention than Vi got, with not a single buff or nerf all season long. Another familiar contender was Jarvan 4, who adored the new sustain given by Goredrinker, with his ult making it impossible to escape. But Worlds 2021 was definitely Viego's stage. His ability to stun, lifesteal, sustain, duel, attack speed buff, everything that we're used to seeing in feature creep just meant that he could not be stopped, especially with the ability to take over other champions and bring even more to his team. So a sad end to Vi's journey through Worlds. So, when we look at Vi under a competitive spotlight, we see an incredibly impactful debut season, and a great win ratio in Season 5's regular season. But the changes to jungle consistently pushed Vi into obscurity as her niche was better managed by other junglers. The engage and pick potential that Elise provided from range and the burst that Lee Sin consistently put out prevented any major impact from Vi through the years. That said, Vi has recently received some tuning to make her play feel more consistent, and builds focusing on lethality with Eclipse are certainly on the rise. I've also been playing her as a support with the new Even Shroud, returning to her old days as a tank engager. It'll be interesting to see where Vi stands for Worlds 2022, but what would you guys change about her kit to make her more viable? Do you think that her initial design for top lane held her back when she moved to the jungle? Or do you think that she needs something different, more lockdown, some way to stick onto targets to apply denting blows better? And who do you think the competitive spotlight should shine upon next? Let me know in the comments below. With all that said, I'll see you all next time.